Hi, my name is Michael Lebenek. I'm a senior manager for AWS Amplify, and today we're going to be talking about building native iOS and Android applications with Flutter. So real quick beforehand, AWS Amplify provides an entire tool set for building front-end applications on AWS. It allows you to get to market faster, allows you to develop using existing iOS and Android IDEs and web frameworks, provides drop-in UI components, and a CLI toolchain to seamlessly configure your backend. You can also deploy your applications, host them using Git-based workflows with the Amplify console. So overall, AWS Amplify provides the frameworks, the console. We also provide a real-time GraphQL solution supporting offline workflows with AWS AppSync. And we also provide a solution for testing and debugging applications with real devices with AWS Device Farm. So overall, we support the entire SDLC from developing your applications with the framework, the toolchain, and now with an admin user interface for defining your data models in your users and groups, delivering your applications with CI/CD workflows connected to Git, and also managing your data with the admin UI. So in total, we support many frameworks and platforms. We support native iOS and Android, React Native, hybrid workflows, Ionic, JavaScript, and web, and several web component frameworks for building web applications with Angular, Vue, and React. And now we support Flutter for hybrid workflows, which we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about Flutter. Per Google's definition, Flutter is a UI toolkit for building beautiful natively compiled applications for mobile, web, and desktop from a single code base. It provides multi-platform functionality, so iOS, Android, web, and desktop platforms are supported. Currently, AWS Amplify for Flutter supports native iOS and Android. It's free and open source, and it is utilizes the Dart language, which we're going to talk a little bit about. One of the big benefits as well is the native performance provided by Flutter, since the applications you build are compiled to the native platforms. So what is Dart? Dart is the programming language utilized by the Flutter framework. It is defined as a client-optimized language for fast apps on any platform. It's optimized for user interfaces similar to Java and JavaScript, and it also supports asynchronous programming model. If you're familiar with JavaScript, it supports a very similar async await syntax. It also supports hot reload and restart of the application, similar to developing a web application. Or if you're familiar with React Native, it's a very similar toolchain that provides automatic restart and reload of your application while you're developing. And of course, it compiles to native machine code, making it very performant. So a quick overview of what Flutter is and how it's built. Flutter contains essentially three components to it: the framework, which is written in Dart, and it provides an engine, which is a low-level C++ engine that supports the platform integration between different native platforms. Finally, followed by the embedder, which is the platform-specific implementation, so iOS, Android, desktop, etc. For Amplify iOS and Android, we opted to utilize the platform channels. After a lot of performance testing, we found vast performance improvements when utilizing the platform channels for native platforms. So when you use Amplify for Flutter, you're actually interacting with, under the covers, Amplify iOS and Android native libraries. This provides great performance improvements, and it also provides the ability to allow platforms to stay in sync. So the Amplify and iOS and Android libraries have code implemented inside of them to support Flutter specifically and other hybrid workflows. So on top of that, we utilize the framework, the Dart layer, to build things like widgets and a abstracted Dart API. So we will be supporting more UI components. Currently, we support the categories within Amplify at the Dart layer, which allows for interacting with auth, storage, analytics, etc. via Dart, which is all serialized and translated using the platform channels down to native Amplify in iOS and Android. So overall, we're using the Dart API as an abstraction layer to provide the Amplify categories. We're serializing and transporting information via the platform channel to native Amplify iOS and Android libraries. So getting started with Flutter via the Flutter documentation is fairly simple to install. Once you have Flutter installed on your machine and configured for your platform, you'll also need the platform-specific tools, so Xcode on iOS, Android Studio. You'll also need the Amplify CLI command line tool, which you can install via NPM. And you can then add dependencies to your pubspec file. This pubspec is a YAML file. It's very similar to a package.json in a JavaScript scenario, or a Gradle file on Android, or a podspec file on iOS. It defines your dependencies, and within those dependencies, you can leave out the version numbers to get the latest version, like you see here in this example. And with Amplify, we have everything prefixed with Amplify, followed by the category, and generally followed by the service implementation. Once you add these lines to the pubspec file, you could then integrate them into your application. You can initialize your application with the CLI to get your AWS backend bootstrapped. You could then import the packages, as you see in this example, and then you can configure the packages. It follows a very similar model to other platforms, including native iOS and Android, JavaScript. Once you import them, you can run a simple Amplify configure method. The Amplify config file is generated via the Amplify CLI, and that file will include your entire AWS backend infrastructure resources, the ARNs that will be used by the Dart layer and ultimately sent down to the native Amplify and iOS implementations for the service calls. And again, this will also support the hot reload and restart provided by Flutter. Overall, with Flutter, we currently support auth, storage, and analytics. We'll be newly supporting DataStore and API this year. With authentication in Flutter with Amplify, you can authenticate with username and password using an SRP workflow with Amazon Cognito. You can authenticate with the hosted UI provided by Cognito, and you can also authenticate a user with another auth provider. Amplify itself is plugin based. So on all platforms, we build Amplify AWS plugins for AWS services, but Amplify in itself, being open source, is pluggable and extendable. So you can build your own plugins and implement them as well. We're going to be completing DataStore this year and launching that via customer feedback provided on GitHub. Will be open source, and Amplify DataStore provides online and offline capabilities using GraphQL. We will be using native storage engines, again using the native iOS and Android platforms under the covers. Gives us the ability to use those native storage engines for storing data. Automatically synchronizes data locally, giving you offline capabilities, all being powered by GraphQL. So at this time, I'm going to take a look at a quick demo and run through some code.
So once you've cloned the repository called amplify-flutter-sample from GitHub, and you cd into that directory, this is going to assume you have the Flutter tooling already installed and the Amplify CLI installed. If you don't have those two things configured, you'll want to go to the appropriate documentation site, so docs.amplify.aws for the Amplify CLI, and Flutter website for documentation on getting that set up. Once you have those things set up and you clone the repository, you will end up with a folder structure like so. I'm using VS Code. There is a couple of folders to note here. One is you'll end up with an Amplify folder. Inside of this Amplify folder, there's a backend config. And all this stuff is outputted from the CLI and publicly available to tell the Amplify CLI how to configure the backend. So once you clone it and you're in the root directory, you can run an amplify init command, which will run through a series of questions to ultimately generate a lib/amplify configuration.dart file. And you also want to make sure that you have the CLI that supports the Flutter preview, which is on a tag, again, available in the Amplify documentation. Once you run that command, you'll want to run an amplify push command after that, which will create your AWS backend. Once that is completed, you should then see a lib amplify configuration.dart file. And this is a file that you don't, if you fork the repo or you have your own based on this, this will be automatically added to the get ignore file. And it's something you don't really want to commit to a public repository. Once you have that file, you can actually run the application. The first thing you want to do is retrieve the packages. So this is something similar to NPM. Flutter has its own packaging system. And to retrieve the packages, which are outlined in the pubspec.yaml file here, if you look at this file, you'll see down under dependencies, we have Amplify Core, Amplify Analytics, and Amplify Auth, and Amplify Storage. There's a camera that's also used in the sample application to take photos, and a couple others. So when you run a flutter pub get, that command will retrieve all the packages from Flutter's packaging system. Once that is complete, you could then run a flutter run command. Just be sure you have a simulator open, a device connected, and the Flutter CLI will run it on whichever one is open. If you have multiple, it'll ask you. I just have a simulator here, so it's going to automatically detect that, and it's going to run a build via Xcode tooling. So you'll obviously need this tooling installed per platform you want to support with Flutter. Android SDK, you want to install the Android Studio. iOS, you want to make sure Xcode and the dev tools are installed on your Mac. So Flutter is going to execute a native Xcode build in this case. So under the covers, this will actually compile and link the Amplify native for iOS, and that's what Flutter Amplify is actually using under the covers. So once it's done building, it will run it on whatever you have attached or the simulator after it installs, and you should see a screen like so. Now you'll also notice here, once you run it, you'll have a few commands available. You could, if you've ever used React Native, you'll see some familiarity here. You can perform hot reloads and restarts, similar to React Native or even developing on the web. So if you just press the R key, it will hot reload any code changes you've made. So the main file, we're going to kind of take a look at some of this functionality around. We'll start with the main.dart file. We'll see we have our import statements. The main packages we're including here, the Amplify ones, and some standard material design for the UI of the application. And then you can see we have our configuration file that was generated by the Amplify CLI, which contains all our Amazon resources, ARNs for our AWS resources. And I have a couple other screens here for authentication in the home screen. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see where Amplify is configured. So the first thing we do is instantiate Amplify, instantiate the specific categories, so auth and storage, auth with Cognito, storage with S3, and analytics with Pinpoint. The initial function that is bootstrapped here is this init state function within Flutter. And the first thing we do is we add plugins. So Amplify itself is plugin based. You can have multiple plugins for auth, storage, and analytics that are not the default ones, being Cognito, S3, and Pinpoint. We're going to instantiate the plugins we've built via these libraries here. And we place these in an array using the add plugin method. And we're passing in the instantiated libraries that we provided up here. So that will configure Amplify categories via the amplify configuration.dart file. So that file does need to exist, otherwise this will blow up. And it also can only contain the plugins you're using. So if you've configured a new category and you do not have it in your configuration here, add plugin, you'll see some errors there. So you want to make sure those are aligned. So the final step here is amplify.configure, and we pass in that config. It's a promise-based interface, asynchronous design here in Flutter, printing a simple command so that we know Amplify's been configured, which you'll see here. And most of these outputs with Flutter are prefixed with Flutter. If it's a other logging from a native platform, you'd see a little differently. We could see Amplify has been configured via this print statement, and we're setting some state and also catching any errors. Now, and this application also supports caching of the authentication. So we initially do a check auth session. So we're checking the authentications here, you could see. If I was already logged in here via this session check, auth.fetch auth session, we can default to the application being logged in using this session is signed in variable. If we're not signed in, then we'll just stay on this login page, or the sign up page here, which we're already sitting on here. And we could also use Amplify Hub. Amplify Hub is a lightweight pub sub mechanism that will allow you to listen to internal events via Amplify. Ultimately, these are all fired by native iOS and Android libraries and bubbled up into the Flutter interface. So we do this directly with the auth category .events.listen to auth, and we'll get a hub event. And we could switch on that hub event with an event name property, and we'll have some ways to listen to some events within the authentication system. So signed in, signed out, session expired. You could find those in the documentation. So if we are signed in, we're going to reset that state, which would ultimately log us into the application. If we're signed out, we're just going to set the state to false on that one. Similarly, if the session is expired, would automatically be logged out at that point using this state within Flutter. So finally, we just have our Flutter code, our widget, which is what we're seeing here. We're using a builder interface to also check that asynchronous method so that this UI will change if we're authenticated. We're going to show this home view passing in the auth instance. If we are not, we're just going to sit on this authenticator page here, which is the one we see here. So let's take a look at this application here. We have a sign up page. You can enter a username, email, password, and verify password. You can also confirm an account using it if you've received a confirmation code, which is what this is using Cognito user pools. So with MFA on sign up, it's using the default setup for authentication via the CLI. So you can create an account. It will obviously use the password policies that have been defined within Cognito. You can also sign in, and you can request to reset your password. Let's go ahead and create an account in here. I'm just going to use a random username, email address. Now you'll have to put in a real email address so that you can retrieve the confirmation code that's going to be sent. And if you're using the default settings via Amplify CLI, if you've created your own Flutter application, you'll have to make sure you adhere to your password policies. And you can hit sign up. And mine failed because I already have an account with this email address and this username. So you can see we've got an error here, from the platform itself, iOS, which has bubbled up a localized error message. It says user already exists. So I've already have this username. I'll put a 3 there. See if that one exists. Now that one doesn't exist. So now I will receive a confirmation code via my email address. So I'll go ahead and check that. You should receive it pretty quickly from Cognito. It'll be a no-reply@verificationemail.com. And I've received mine. is 97276. Confirm. And now I'm confirmed and I can now log in. So I have my username here, mlab3, and I've created my password. Now I can go to log in, mlab3, and my password, sign in, and now I'm logged in. And we could see here on the console that as soon as we signed in, we received this hub event, which is via this main Dart file. You could see hub user is signed in, and then the authentication check, because the state was changed. And if you remember back, we have this future builder. So now that that hub event, that state has changed, Dart's future builder interface will automatically run this check session again since the state changed. The check session is going to run, as we see, this print command. It's going to try this, and it's going to see we are in fact logged in now. And I'll set the session to the current session, and we'll be logged in. And what we're seeing here is under screens home.dart. And inside of home.dart, we got a bunch of UI to show this page. There's a button to take a photo. If you click the photo in the simulator, it may not work for you. You may have to run that in an actual device. But this code is basically right out of the Flutter documentation for working with the camera. We check for available cameras. Ultimately, it's just grabbing the first camera that's available, cameras.first here. And then ultimately, it would be taking a photo. Now, the other relevant piece here is under camera.dart. Under camera.dart, you'll see the storage upload, which is a button event. And we have a functionality here to upload to S3 via our configuration, via the Amplify CLI. So we create some options, an access level of protected, which means only my data, I will only be able to access my data within Amazon S3 that will be structured with a prefix of my specific Cognito identity ID, which is unique to me and my identity as an authenticated user in this application. And you can also pass some metadata, and this will go directly to S3 when it's uploaded. So in this case, I'm passing a key and just a description that it was uploaded with Flutter, and you'll be able to see that data in the S3 console. And then run a simple amplify.storage.upload file with the key. This is just a timestamp I'm creating here. And a couple other options. The file itself, which came from the Flutter interface for capturing an image. And then some of the options I created up here with the access level and the metadata. And it's an asynchronous method, so I can listen to it similarly like in JavaScript with a then and a catch. So once we're complete, using the navigator interface in Flutter to pop that view off the navigation stack and display the image here. So pretty simple interface as far as storage goes. Using camera is fairly simple in Flutter. Let's take a look at some of the auth methods here as well. So if you click this X up here in the sample app, you'll be logged out. And you'll also see here I got that same hub event. So these hub events were basically registered in main.dart, the main entry point. So now they're constantly listening, which is pretty nice. So you can kind of pop views on and off the stack this way, or set state, however you want to do it. So this sign out method ultimately just used the amplify.signout method, which fired this hub event, which set the state to signed out as false. We could see I'm signed out. Let's take a look at that. So the auth interface is pretty simple for this application. We're actually just including a couple separate components here, which is one of the nicer parts about Flutter is it's very component driven and widget driven. So you can have different UI components. So you could see there's this tabbed interface here, and I'm using separate components for each UI view here. And then you can see those components under lib components. Sign in, for example. And then under sign in, you'll see sign-in result. A lot of this code is pretty much exactly as the documentation is. Nothing too out of the ordinary going on here. Sign in using the text from the input components, and it's using SRP auth with Cognito user pools, so the passwords are never leaving the device. So let's look at another example of actually a forgot password. So I'll use the user I created here, mlab3. Let's take a look at the components forgot password.dart file. The main Amplify interface we're looking at here is this reset password result, which is returned from the amplify.auth.reset password. Now, Flutter makes it really easy to switch views in and out. Like you saw, that feature builder is pretty cool, but also the scaffolding is pretty straightforward, and you could use this visibility widget, which takes a visible command, which you can attach directly to a Boolean variable and kind of easily switch out views or show and hide views. So I'm using this set state similarly to the home and authentication view in the reset password, but I have all the functionality here to call the Amplify Amplify forgot password reset password, which is just taking the username. So I enter my username, hit submit, and that's going to send another confirmation code to your email, and it's going to find that email via Cognito, because when you set up Amplify, you would have the default Amplify setup via the CLI is going to use email for MFA. So when you use, because Cognito is set up that way, all you have to do is pass this username. Now it also means you could have email as the username, that's fine. But if you had SMS, for example, it would have automatically sent an SMS message instead. All depends how you configured your Cognito instance. So I received my code. So you enter the code, and then you just enter your new password. If everything works out well, your password will be reset. So that was the second function here that ran, confirm password. Username, new password, and confirmation code, all just coming from these Flutter UI widgets here. And you can see I got the your password has been reset toast message. So now I can immediately go back to login with that same user and log in with the new password I just created via forgot password in MFA. And everything works, and you can see I got the hub events just fine. So that's everything. The mainnet has a lot of room for improvement on this, and if you'd like to contribute to it, it's obviously open source and available on GitHub. Thanks a lot.
So here are some additional resources for when you're building with AWS Amplify. You could obviously check out our main website on aws.amazon.com/amplify. Our documentation is available at docs.amplify.aws and is also open source. And please check us out on GitHub. All our development efforts are done there in open source. We accept contributions and pull requests, and we have a Discord channel. And also some additional sessions. We have some live Twitch sessions going on, so please check those out as well. So thank you very much.